Good evening, everybody. I'm Ed Epstein, president of the Lincoln Group of the District of Columbia, and welcome to our January 2026 program. If you're interested in Abraham Lincoln and his vision and his legacy, you might want to join the Lincoln Group of DC. You can do that by going to our website, lincolnian.org, and clicking on Join Now. It's a real bargain. We're a very active organization. Thank you. Welcome to tonight's program about Abraham Lincoln's political wizard and political friend, David Davis. Our presenter, Judge Raymond McKoski, spent 26 years as a trial court judge in Lake County, Illinois, the county north of Chicago that runs all the way up to the Wisconsin state line. He retired from the court in December 2010. Since then, he has been busy as a teacher, writer, and speaker on judicial history and legal ethics. He is an adjunct professor at the University of Illinois Chicago College of Law and served as a guest faculty member at the Notre Dame University Law School. He's a graduate of the DePaul University College of Law in Chicago and has argued cases at the state and federal level, including before the U.S. Supreme Court. His new book, David Davis, Abraham Lincoln's Favorite Judge, is published by the University of Illinois Press and is available for sale. He will speak for about half an hour, leaving plenty of time for your questions and discussion on this fascinating intimate of Abraham Lincoln. Judge McKoski, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. And thanks to the group for inviting me to speak. It goes without saying, I love speaking about David Davis and Abraham Lincoln. I especially enjoy it with groups like this that are educated and knowledgeable about Lincoln and Davis and their times. And so I'm looking forward to questions and comments about the topic in general. I know that you had Ed Acorn here to speak, and so about his great book, The Lincoln Miracle. So I'm going to use a chunk of my time to talk about David Davis at the convention, especially how he got to be the manager of the convention, and who else, if anybody, among the legions of Lincoln supporters could have filled that role. That's one chapter in my book talks about the convention. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Hopefully, I'll have a chance to mention some of the highlights of the other chapters. I have a chapter on the two senatorial races that Lincoln was in 1854 and 1859, which even though Davis and Lincoln were very astute politicians, made some serious mistakes in both of those campaigns. I talk about that in the book. I also talk about the general election, not just Lincoln's nomination, which is fascinating to me, the general election, the role that David Davis played in some of the problems he faced as a troubleshooter for Lincoln. The book also talks about his appointment to the Supreme Court and his work on the Supreme Court. And I have one slide on that maybe we can talk a little bit about that. And a fairly big part of the book on an area that other people haven't covered, and that is David Davis's acknowledged impartiality, independence as a judge, honesty, that even his critics acknowledged his honesty in dealing with people and dealing in his government jobs. So hopefully we can get to that. I do want to start, though, so we're all sort of on the same playing field. I want to start with just a little bit of David Davis's background so we can put his accomplishments in context. He was born 1815. That makes him 6 years younger than Abraham Lincoln. He was born on the eastern shore of Maryland. His mother's family, father owned a plantation on the eastern shore. David Davis's father was a medical doctor, graduated medical school, had a thriving practice in Maryland. And you would think with that kind of start, pretty wealthy plantation owner, father a medical doctor, they would have had a relatively easy childhood. But as things happen, David Davis's father died 8 months before David Davis was born. He lived the first 5 years of his life on the plantation with his mother and his maternal grandfather and their families, and was doing fine until, I don't want to be too judgmental here, until his mother remarried Lyman Betts, who was a book dealer, bookseller. At least that's what he said his profession was. He never made much money. Had to wind up using David Davis's $5,000 inheritance to live off of. Shuffled David Davis around. Some friends finally sent him to his father's brother, who he lived with for about 4 years and learned from, was taught by his uncle's mother and her sister. Went back home with his stepfather and his mother when his uncle sued his stepfather for depleting his inheritance. And at the ripe old age of 13, David Davis's stepfather put him on a stagecoach with a coat, a few pair of underwear, $42, and sent him off to Kenyon College in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of Ohio. And David Davis was there attending Kenyon College for 4 years. Wasn't much of a school when he got there. The basement was completed. That was about it. And he worked his upkeep, his room and board, and his tuition by working at the farms that the college owned there, farming their property and building the school. He graduated there. He went to Massachusetts, clerked at a law firm there, of course, ran into the probate judge's daughter. It was love at first sight. He asked to marry Sarah Walker, the probate judge's daughter. Her father said basically, don't call us, we'll call you about the marriage in about 3 years. David Davis went off to earn his fortune, so to speak, in Illinois, the middle of Illinois, began a law practice there. And that's where he ran into Abraham Lincoln, who was also a lawyer at the time. They worked for 10 years as a lawyer. David Davis was elected a judge in 1848. He then was riding the circuit in the middle of Illinois as a judge. Lincoln was still a lawyer. And this is where they bonded. We can talk about that a little bit.
Judge, why don't you start your PowerPoint presentation or have John do it?
Okay, I'm going to just.
Why don't you finish this and then start it?
We can do that.
Whenever you're ready.
The first slide that I show is my favorite slide of David Davis, picture of him and his wife. Taken in the 1840s, probably. He's a pretty young man. I like this picture because it's not only a nice picture, but it's one that shows him not looking like a mean old judge, and judges look mean old judges even when they're young, but this is a nice photograph. David Davis helped Lincoln in Lincoln's 2 tries for the U.S. Senate, was instrumental, the person that led to his nomination in 1860. David Davis was appointed to the Supreme Court by Lincoln. He served there for about 15 years, got tired of it, became a U.S. Senator, the only U.S. Supreme Court judge to retire for the purpose of going to the U.S. Senate, and served there with some distinction. All right, that gives us a little history about him. I love this picture. Let's make sure. Oh, so let's see. I'm going to show my ignorance real quick on this. We want to move the slide. I don't hit this little arrow here. Somebody give me a hand on how I go to the next slide.
You should be able to hit the arrow.
Okay, maybe there it worked. Maybe it was just a little delay.
There you go. You got it.
But I appreciate that, and I'm not shy to showing my ignorance on these things. Just wanted to show this is where David Davis and Lincoln practiced in the middle of Illinois. To the north was all Republicans, to make a generalization. The south was almost strictly Democrat, and these middle counties, old Whig counties, combination of Southerners and New Englanders, is where a lot of the elections were controlled or dictated by. David Davis said that, as this slide says, it was impossible for a body of intelligent gentlemen to associate together. And he's talking about on the trial court circuit in the middle of Illinois, where these lawyers and the judge went from county to county, 2 days here, 3 days here, all around these 14 counties, dispensing justice. They lived together, played together, politicked together. And they did it for 6 months out of the year, 3 months in the spring and 3 months in the fall. And as Davis said, it was impossible for a body of intelligent men to associate for 6 months without becoming attached to each other and without mutual benefit to each other. And mutual benefit, professional benefit, personal benefit, and political benefit. But my point here is that Lincoln and Davis's association was a lot closer and became a lot closer over the years. They served as lawyers together. And then when Davis became a judge, they had a special relationship. And that is supported by a lot of different facts, but also the observation of contemporaries. Ward Layman, although I've been told that the pronunciation of Lamon at that time with Ward Layman was lemon. So if it is, I'll correct it to that. He was a lawyer on the circuit. He was Lincoln's bodyguard and U.S. Marshal when he became president. Layman said he didn't know of anybody who had a more confidential relationship with Lincoln than Davis, and that they never had a quarrel. Gustav Corner, also a lawyer on the circuit, he and the lieutenant governor and a big operator in the German community, carried a lot of weight with the German community and their voting patterns. He said that he knew of no one that was more intimate with Lincoln than Davis, and that Lincoln had close friends you could count on one hand, and Davis was for sure among those close friends. Historians Doris Goodwin, Michael Birmingham agree with this conclusion that they were close, although some historians don't. And basis for that loyalty was for that relationship was the absolute loyalty that Davis had for Lincoln. Not in deciding cases in court. Lincoln lost more cases in front of Davis than he won, but in personal loyalty, political loyalty. The clerk of Champaign County Court called them constant companions. They were close friends to the end, as opposed to Norman Judd and others we'll talk about that sort of separated from them. And part of the closeness was because they had some similarities. I mean, they had differences. David Davis was about 5'11", 300 pounds, and a little over 300 pounds as the years went on. He was a nice dresser, real good conversationalist, a little different than Lincoln. But they had similarities. They didn't drink. And so on the circuit, that would put them closer together because they didn't drink. Davis drank some, Lincoln didn't drink at all. Their approach to the law was the same. Mediation, settling of cases. They were both Henry Clay Whigs from the start. Both absolutely honest. And this is shown by a couple of the letters. Davis wrote a letter to Lincoln. We don't have the letter, but it was a letter when Lincoln was congressman, asking Lincoln some stuff, but also saying, Lincoln, how you doing? Are you feeling all right? Are you keeping your strength up? Stuff like that. And this is the letter that Lincoln wrote back that obviously we do have in February, a month later. So this is your letter. That's Davis's letter of 24th of January is received, and I, Lincoln, have more than that I can thank you for it than you would suppose. Lincoln says out of the more than 300 letters received this session, congressional session. Yours is only the second one that manifests any interest for me personally. Lincoln understood that Davis had this personal connection, was concerned about his well-being. Davis was very aware of Lincoln's depressive moods, melancholy. Lincoln appreciated this. The trust and the loyalty also led Lincoln to write a letter to Long John Wentworth, mayor of Chicago, among other things. You had perfect liberty to show my letter to Judge Davis. I keep no secrets from him. It was a close relationship, at least as close as Lincoln could have. Like I said, I wanted to talk about the convention a tiny bit. This is the wigwam, as we know, in Chicago. May of 1860, Republican National Nominating Convention nominate the presidential candidate for the Republicans in 1860. As all of you know better than I do, Lincoln was a dark horse, if you can even call him a dark horse. David Davis led the floor fight for him. There's no question about that. Credit for the nomination in large part goes to Davis and what he accomplished, taking somebody who was barely a dark horse to the nomination. What I want to talk about a little bit, and you people know a lot about that, and Acorn's book is terrific on that. What I want to concentrate on for about 5 minutes is, well, why was Davis in charge? You know, other books say Davis was in charge, but how he got there or who else could have taken his place sometime isn't looked at. And I want to look at it in a couple contexts. Number one, it goes without saying, David Davis had very good organizational skills, political skills. One lawyer said he knew more people in the middle of Illinois than any other person alive. He had all the political and organizational skills that you would need to run a campaign. Also, most of the people working for Lincoln during the convention were from the middle of the state. A lot of them lawyers that were used to taking orders from Davis without debate. I mean, Davis gave an order, that's how it went. And that was true on the circuit court. It was true at the convention. But, and before the convention, Lincoln told Norman Judd, the chairman of the Republican Party, Lincoln said, I want only one thing as far as the convention goes. I want Davis a delegate. And Davis told Lincoln he wanted to be a delegate. Davis hadn't been a delegate even in the state Republican conventions. He wanted to be a delegate. And Davis wanted to be a delegate because he wanted nobody else in charge. He didn't want anybody in charge who had goofed up Lincoln's senatorial campaigns or anything else. Norman Judd told Lincoln, fine. Lincoln said to Norman Judd, you be a delegate too. And Judd said, okay, I'll be a delegate at the National Convention, but I won't have any influence. Don't count on too much for me. Judd never had the loyalty to Lincoln that Davis had, or a lot of other people had for that matter. Norman Judd went a month before the campaign was saying he couldn't understand why Lincoln wanted to be president, wanted the nomination, when there were first-class candidates like Simon Cameron from Pennsylvania, Lyman Trumbull, his old friend from Illinois, who was a senator, who Lincoln's votes put him in the Senate, or John Palmer, a politician in Illinois. Norman Judd, beside that, half the people who were delegates and the workers at the convention didn't trust Judd because they blamed him for losing Lincoln's senatorial campaign the second time. He wasn't the possibility to be the floor manager. Somebody who's saying a month before the convention, I don't understand why Lincoln wants to be president. That's not who you want running your operation. Orville Browning was for another politician, a longtime friend of Lincoln, almost was appointed to the Supreme Court instead of Davis. He was a Bates person to the day of the convention, talking up Bates, telling Bates at the convention, don't worry, Illinois is going to vote a unit ballot on the first ballot for Lincoln, but after that, they won't follow Lincoln, and I can get you a majority for you, Bates. This is not, he was 3 days late to the convention, and when asked if he'd be vice president of the Illinois delegation, Browning said no. Can you have somebody like that as your floor leader? Lyman Trumbull, Lincoln made him senator in 1854 by giving him his votes so he would beat somebody else. Trumbull, a week before the convention in May of 1860, Lincoln wrote Lyman Trumbull a letter saying, stop sending letters saying you support somebody else or appearing to say you support somebody else. He was a John McLean man, Supreme Court Justice from Ohio, and he didn't make any bones about it. A lot of the people supporting Lincoln didn't want Trumbull as a delegate because he was a Bates supporter. Lincoln, smarter than all of them, because he picked Trumbull for a delegate, and Trumbull spent his time, as a true soldier should, talking about why Bates couldn't be elected. Although after the convention, Trumbull lamented that if only the convention would have dragged on longer, Bates would have made it in. Can he be your floor leader? Richard Yates, good man, was elected governor in January of 1861 when he's given his opening speech to the legislature. Showed up too drunk to read it. Had to have the clerk read it for him. Had an alcohol problem. And I won't go into the others. William Butler wasn't speaking to Lincoln for 10 years until 1858. Stephen Logan, Lincoln once said, who was his law partner, great guy, great lawyer. Lincoln said, when Logan ran for the Supreme Court, he ran the worst campaign ever since elections were invented. Not a compliment. All right. So my point here is there weren't many other choices beside Davis. He had the respect of the workers. Even decisions they didn't like, they would follow. They wouldn't follow Judd. Beside that, Judd didn't even want him to be running. He did his job. He got the convention in Chicago. He talked for Lincoln at the convention, but his heart wasn't totally in this. David Davis's heart was in it. And he did it. Supreme Court. I just wanted to show you this picture. This is when Lincoln appoints Davis to the Supreme Court. He got appointed in 1862. This is from 1867. The first photograph ever taken of a total Supreme Court. Now, my first question to you people is, how would you like to face this group when they were having a bad day? You know, look at this group. The guy standing on the left is the clerk of the court. The first person seated next to him with the beard, first seated gentleman on your left is David Davis. He doesn't look 350 pounds at this point because he'd been sick. The only other people of interest, I would say, in the middle, the bald-headed guy in the middle, Salmon Chase, who wanted to be president for a long time. Davis got along with him. He's the Chief Justice, Solomon Chase, at the time. Lincoln appointed him Chief Justice. And somebody who gets mistaken for Davis a lot of times in the picture is from Chase 1-2 over, not a big heavy guy. He got mistaken for Davis a lot, basically because they were both so heavy. Davis was an independent voice on the court, decided some cases that was consistent with Lincoln's position, decided some cases that were diametrically opposed. Milligan, ex parte Milligan, about trying civilians in a military court, which he just, when he decided it with 4 Democrats and him and 4 Republicans dissenting, because Davis said neither the Congress or the president can okay non-jury trials in a military commission in states that were at peace, hadn't succeeded. Lambasted by the Republican Party in the papers. You got Lincoln, to make a long story short, if that's still possible. Davis got tired of the Supreme Court. I don't know if he was ever cut out to write opinions. He didn't like it. His opinions were short, a lot of times didn't cite any precedent. He got tired of it, so he let it be known to the Illinois legislature that he would accept an appointment to the U.S. Senate if they got around to needing somebody. And as you know, this was before the 17th Amendment, before popular election of senators, and the state legislatures appointed U.S. senators. 1877, on the 40th ballot, the Democrats vote with some independents to make David Davis a U.S. senator. He was elected by all Democrats, no Republican votes, gets to the Senate, sits on the Republican side of the aisle and caucuses with neither party. The only thing I'll mention, how effective was Davis as a senator? Not very effective. He still abided by his impartiality. This is why he wouldn't sit with the Democrats, wouldn't caucus with either party. He prized his independence, and he was, as a senator, this was recognized by papers, by other politicians. And when you're impartial in a partisan body, this doesn't work too good. So what happens? He's on the Senate in 1877, independent voice. James Garfield is assassinated. He dies. Chester Arthur is appointed president or assumes the office in 1881 when Garfield dies. They needed president pro tem of the Senate because Chester Arthur can't fulfill president of the Senate anymore. On a vote of all Republicans and no Democrats, Davis is made president pro tem of the Senate on the basis that nobody was too sure of his political leanings, but he was going to be fair and impartial as a presiding officer. And so the Republicans didn't protest. I mean, the Democrats didn't protest too much. He was elected to the Senate by all Democrats, made president pro tem by all Republican vote. And when the day came when he was sworn in as the president pro tem, and he was escorted up to the president pro tem's chair, who escorted him up there? John Logan, who David Davis had beaten in the 40 ballot senatorial race in 1877. John Logan had been elected a senator by the legislature after that. So my point is, and I suppose my closing point is, could this happen today? Somebody elected by all Democrats, refusing to caucus with them, sitting on the other party's side, then 4 years later, elected to a higher position, or a position anyway, by the opposite party with no votes of the party that put him in this position in the first place, and be escorted to the seat, and that's an honorable position, the escort, by the person you beat for the Senate. I'm not so sure this could happen again, or at least can happen today. Hopefully it could happen again. I think it maybe could have happened when I was a young man and there were some ways, other types of politicians being elected. But I'm not so sure today. So here's my point. My point that David Davis, if it wasn't for him, and Lincoln admitted this once, if it wasn't for him, Lincoln wouldn't have been president. He admitted that to Leonard Swett, Davis's right-hand man. Number two, he had a remarkable life, starting with not much other than a college education. And unfortunately, I didn't have time, and that's fine. He was an absolutely impartial, independent judge, at least as far as any human being can be impartial, independent. It was shown in his Supreme Court decisions. It was shown in his trial court decisions. It was admitted by even people who didn't like him. And there were some people who didn't like him for political reasons, but they would always say, but he's a fair judge. Some people didn't like him the way he gained his millions by owning property. But the one person who wrote a letter to the paper saying didn't like that he made money by just buying land and not improving it and selling it for a profit, he just tacks on automatically. But he was a fair judge and an honest man. Thank think more people, as you could tell, more people should know about him. He suffered the fate, of a lot of the people who surrounded Lincoln. Lincoln supersedes them all, and rightfully so. But as you can tell, I'm a fan of David Davis. Ed, thanks.
Thank you, Judge McKoski. So now if anyone has a question or a comment, raise your hand. You can do that on the reaction bar down at the bottom, or speak up now. Bonnie Harper, go ahead for your first. You're muted.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's very interesting, and I have also been interested to learn about David Davis. So the question I have is, there is a story that I wonder if you're familiar with, that after Lincoln got elected, Davis, I had the impression that Davis sort of got left behind with an appointment, or like a gratitude position that he might have offered him, and that Davis made the comment to someone that Lincoln never said thank you. Are you familiar with that story? And could you talk about it a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. It's a great question. And Davis made statements like that when he was being interviewed by William Herndon in, I should remember the year, 1866, 1867. And Herndon was interviewing all these people, and he interviewed Davis. And I spend a fair amount of time in the book talking about this, because what Davis says in some respects isn't very flattering to Lincoln. Number one, I think he did feel left behind. I mean, he shouldn't have. He was appointed to the Supreme Court. But one thing that he missed or felt left behind on is, and he says this, during the campaign up to 1860 and in 1850 and in 1840, Lincoln would talk to him all the time and write letters to Davis and so ask his advice on things. When Lincoln became president, Davis complains he wasn't being called anymore. He wasn't getting any letters from Lincoln. And he does feel left out and left behind. There's no question about that. And he feels that Lincoln should have, number one, consulted him more and relied on his advice. Now, Lincoln relied on his own judgments, and Davis shouldn't have been surprised that maybe he didn't ask Davis or rely on Davis's thoughts. Davis didn't rely on anybody. Davis was his own person, made his own decisions. Number two, Lincoln does tell Herndon that Lincoln never thanked him for anything. He never said thank you to Davis, just as you said, Bonnie. And my response to that is, that may be. I'm guessing David Davis never said thank you to Leonard Swett, who was his right-hand man, who, in my opinion, is the one who got Lincoln to appoint him to the Supreme Court. When Davis was talking to Herndon, he said things about Lincoln, commenting on Lincoln's characteristics or personality in words that he hadn't used, and that were more derogatory 5 years before. I'm just going to give one example and then stop. Before Lincoln died, Davis said, "Lincoln's a man who thinks for himself. I appreciate that, and you can't say that about many people, that they think for themselves." When he's talking to Herndon, he said, Lincoln didn't ask anybody for their opinion, didn't listen to anybody, and never said thank you. Well, Davis is talking about the same characteristic. One, first time flattering, he's a man who thinks for himself, and you can't say that about many people these days. The second time, less flattering. He never listens to anybody, meaning Davis, never says thank you. I'm not sure why there was a switch on this, and it could be, as you say, Bonnie, he was feeling left out, or was in a bad mood or something. But with the comments you said, Davis has made them. The explanation for him, I'm not 100% sure.
Thank you.
John O'Brien.
Thanks, Ed. There's some questions in the chat I want to read. In my opinion, Acorn characterizes Davis as the Dick Daley of the 1860 Republican miracle. What do you think about that comparison?
Well, luckily I can remember Dick Daley, you know. He was smarter than Dick Daley, more educated than Dick Daley, had more finesse than Dick Daley, didn't have as much power as Dick Daley, but they had similarities. There's no question about that. And one of them was, as Lincoln said, this is not my opinion, Lincoln said that Davis had a way of getting people to do things that they really didn't want to do. And I'm guessing that Daley had that same ability, got people to do things they really didn't want to do. So I would say they were similar in that regard, in getting stuff done, getting people to do what they wanted to do, even if they didn't want to do it. And I think the comparison is legitimate. He was just smoother than Dick Daley.
Thank you. One more before I move on. Had Davis remained on the Supreme Court for the disputed election of 1876, do you think he would have supported Tilden or Hayes?
An excellent question. And I had a slide on Tilden and Hayes that I didn't want to go into because I make even short stories long stories. You can tell that. Davis said that after the whole thing was settled by the Congressional Committee that he said he would never have served on, he said that the way it was decided that Hayes won was the only legitimate way it could be decided. Any lawyer or judge worth their salt would have voted that way. He said that in a letter. So that would lead us to believe that he would have voted for Hayes. All right. But then I discovered another letter after that where Davis just says Tilden was robbed. Sort of sounds inconsistent. And this isn't just somebody saying, oh, I remember Davis saying such and such. These are in letters. And I suppose we could explain it. The Tilden was robbed because the state people counting the votes were crooks, but on the Supreme Court, you got to go with what they came with. But my opinion is he would have voted and said that the vote that came out of this special commission was the only one possible, that Hayes has to be president.
Somebody asked if you could comment a little bit more about ex parte Milligan.
Sure. Lincoln created military tribunals, and these military tribunals, would try military people, but they also started to try civilians, maybe who were alleged to have maybe wanted to conspire with the Confederacy or speaking against the Union. They started to arrest and try these people. And Milligan was tried in Indiana, found guilty. Military justice, the old saying is like military music. There's not much of a resemblance. But anyway, the issue became before the U.S. Supreme Court. Can a military tribunal try a non-military person, try a civilian in a state where the regular courts are open and functioning? Indiana, the courts were opening and functioning. There was no invasion. Can a military tribunal try somebody? Or does it have to be the civil court, the regular court, charge them with a crime under state law and give them a regular trial? Because then you get a jury. And this was a big issue. The radical Republicans wanted a decision. Of course you can try them in a military court, because if you can't, we might be in big trouble on our reconstruction plans in the South. And the Democrats, of course, don't like it. Davis decided, the only Republican with 4 Democrats, and he wrote the opinion, decided you can't try a civilian in a state that hasn't seceded. The courts are open. and there's no reason you can't try them in civilian court, regular court. Four Republicans, including Chief Justice Chase, said, Davis is right. The president can't set a commission like this, but the Congress could. And Davis, in what lawyers might call dicta, Davis said, the president can't establish this commission that takes away the right to a jury trial, and Congress can't. He just threw that in. Chase said, he's right. President can't create the commission. Milligan's not guilty or whatever, but Congress could. So this was a big hassle, mainly concerning Reconstruction. Could Congress create a military tribunal that could try civilians? Davis took a beating in the press, the Republican press. He took a beating with the radical Republicans in Congress. The Republican Party wrote a pamphlet and published a pamphlet saying how bad this decision was. He took a beating, and he writes to his brother-in-law, who he wrote a lot to. I can take the beating. I'm a little bit surprised at the beating, but I can take it because I have to do what's right in the eyes of, my eyes, with the help of the Lord, and I'll live with it. And he did. That's Milligan, basically. And Davis wasn't a real writer, but he's got some great language in there about the Constitution is effective at all times for all men, kings or common people. It's effective all the time. And let me just say this one last thing on that case. Davis was facing this issue because the military was sort of gaining control of everything. It was out of balance. Civilian authorities and military authorities, at least in Davis's view. He needed to rein in the military and give the civilian authorities a little more say in what's going on. So he envisioned this as military rule versus civilian rule. It was leaning a little bit too much toward military. So he wanted to bring it back, put the military in their place.
Okay, thank you, Judge. According to our member, Michelle Crowell, about the pronunciation
Good.
of Ward Hill Lamon's surname, she says that according to J.G. Randall, Lamon's daughter Dorothy pronounced Lamon to rhyme with salmon.
Excellent.
Rising to the judge's defense, we did have a Lincoln a lemon portrayer present to us once who had done considerable research with the family, and he told us that it was lemon, that the family told him it was lemon. So
that's a
you
great
say
thing.
Tomato, I say tomato.
Yeah, that's right. It's a great thing about these little issues. But I appreciate the feedback. I got two different responses. No, I appreciate that from the family. I think that's great.
Now you're just as confused as you were before.
Glad to clear that up for you.
Where are Davis's papers, his letters kept, and what other primary sources did you consult?
Oh, excellent. I knew they'd be excellent questions here. David Davis papers, you can get them or copies of them in the Lincoln Museum, Chicago History Museum, but Lincoln's correspondence, not Lincoln, Davis family correspondence, you can find in those places. But Illinois Wesleyan has a website where hundreds of these David Davis family letters written by Davis, letters written by his wife, who wrote a zillion letters that are almost as interesting as David Davis's. All these hundreds, and there's more than 1,000 letters, can be viewed, downloaded at the Illinois Wesleyan College in Illinois site. If you Google David Davis family correspondence, David Davis family correspondence, it'll take you right there. It's got some searchable abilities. The letters were the best source. I love going through the old newspapers, which is a lot easier to do than in the microfilm or microfiche days, when you can get a lot of these papers on free databases. A couple I had to pay for. You can get them on free databases. I like the letters. I like the newspapers. I like the journals that some people kept. Orville Browning has a great diary day-by-day stuff, sometimes a little self-serving. But if I had a diary, it'd be self-serving, I'll tell you that. These original, and a lot of secondary sources, I really like the letters though, because you can say, yeah, Lincoln said this. How do you know? It's in the letter. As you people know, a lot of this information that I learned, because I'm not a historian, um, a lot of this information is somebody saying in 1929, my first cousin's best friend told me that Lincoln told Davis such and such. Um, okay, and I relied on some of that. I also refused to rely on some of it. Um, and that's why the stuff in the journals and the letters and similar documents are great. Papers are great, but there were Republican papers then and there were Democrat papers. You look at the estimate at the size of the people attending a gathering. If it's a Republican gathering, the Republicans put it at 100,000, the Democrats put it at 25,000. But the papers were a big source of information for me. I cited a lot of papers. Now, see, we got another chat there, but I can't read. It was
What's
somebody
your,
who.
the Lincoln group had a tour of Central Illinois about a decade
Oh,
ago and visited David Davis Mansion. I'm sure you've been there many times. What's your opinion of the place? Is it worth visiting?
oh, yeah, oh, absolutely. Of course, I'm a biased observer here, and I think that's great that you took a tour there. What got me interested in David Davis was my wife and I going through the place on the way back from the Abraham Lincoln Museum to the northeast corner of Illinois. We had nowhere else to before TripAdvisor. My wife sees it in the guidebook. Docent was unbelievable. I really was interested in it. They've kept it up terrific. The people who provide the tours are real knowledgeable. I spoke there in September, was it, or October? I love going there.
Is it a state? Who runs it? The state, or is it?
Yeah, the state has it now. It's a state historical site now. The David Davis Foundation and the historical site has a site supervisor and an assistant and whatever. But the David Davis Mansion Foundation funds a lot of this, does a newsletter, is the one who invited me. Um, they do a lot of great work. It's a real active group, the foundation.
After Lincoln was elected, were there hard feelings between Davis and Lincoln because Lincoln didn't appoint him to anything, right? Until that later, much later.
The-
Did he
I don't
lobby
think
Lincoln? How hard did he lobby for a position?
David Davis lobbied Lincoln for positions for all kinds of people. Which I could go down the list right now. Little people, big people, out-of-state people. He was pushy guy.
What about for himself?
No, no. And even if Lincoln didn't want to appoint an Illinoisan to his cabinet because he says Illinois shouldn't have the presidency in a cabinet. And he didn't appoint Norman Judd, who he considered for a cabinet. Beside that, Davis was smart enough to know not to lobby for a position for himself. And if somebody's got information contrary to this, David or anybody else, I would love to see it. On the Supreme Court appointment between him and Orville Browning, Browning wrote a letter to Lincoln saying, I want the job. Browning's wife wrote a letter to Lincoln saying, I want the job. Davis knew this was a no-no. When people went on Davis's behalf for the Supreme Court appointment, Davis would always tell him, don't go. Now, Davis knew that Sweat and the others would go anyway and tell Lincoln that Davis told me not to go. But I'm not aware of anything where Davis was pushing himself for a cabinet post. The owner and editor of the Pittsburgh Gazette was pushing for him. His cousin pushed for him. I don't know. He felt left out. I agree with that. He was happy with the Supreme Court appointment when he got it in 1962, but I am not aware, at least of stuff that I would trust saying he lobbied for a cabinet appointment or anything like that.
What did he do for a living before he was appointed to the Supreme Court during the Civil War?
He was still a judge in Circuit Court, 8th Judicial Circuit, in the middle of Illinois. And he did, I keep saying this, he did feel, I mean, he was all the excitement of Washington, D.C. He was at a table in the lobby with his white suit and white hat, doing favors for the big and the small. It's recorded in a letter. He went back to being a judge in no man's land in the middle of Illinois. I'm sure he felt left out, but that's what he did.
Anyone else have a question?
Judge,
I
you
have
used it.
Who? Pardon?
Go
John
ahead.
I
O'Brien
have a
had his hand up.
question. Yeah. Okay, I had a
Right.
question about the convention. It's a long-standing understanding of mine that Lincoln famously told his managers at the Republican convention in May of 1860, "Do not make any binding promises in my name." And everybody solemnly agreed to it. And somehow all these promises, in fact, were made. Are we to blame or credit Judge Davis for violating Lincoln's express preferences?
Oh, I love this question for a number of reasons. Lincoln sent a newspaper to Davis day before the vote, maybe, sent it to all the Illinois people. Do not make any, and he writes on the paper, do not make any contracts that bind me. Do not make any contracts that bind me. Authors, including Ed Acorn, say that deals were cut with Indiana, Pennsylvania for sure. Sometimes they're a little wishy-washy in Indiana and maybe Ohio, but the Ohio story for a deal is just too much for me. Some authors say, some historians say deals were cut, especially for Pennsylvania. Some say there weren't. I fall down on the side that said deals were not made, or there's a deal promising somebody a job in Lincoln's cabinet was not made. I'm not saying there weren't promises made. But there were no promises made, in my opinion, that bound Lincoln. These were lawyers. Lincoln wrote this instruction. It didn't say don't make any promises. It didn't say don't make any deals. It said don't make any promises that bind me. Davis could bind himself. Davis could bind the whole delegation. And in my opinion, what happened is Davis had these discussions, especially with Pennsylvania, to get their big chunk of votes for Lincoln, because this could turn it for him. Simon Cameron was the big boss, although only about 2/3 of his delegates in Pennsylvania were for him. And they had these quiet discussions with John Sanderson from Pennsylvania. My opinion is, and I don't want to take up the time going into this in detail, Davis had a discussion with Sanderson, especially saying, of course, if Pennsylvania goes with Lincoln, somebody from Pennsylvania is going to get appointed to the cabinet. Who better? He's talking to Simon Cameron's man now. Who better than Simon Cameron? Nobody. You could get hundreds of letters for Cameron. Of course we could. He's in the Senate. All the senators could vouch for him. Oh, yes, they would. Well, don't you think? And me, Davis, and my buddy Sweat and Norman Judd and everybody in the delegation is going to go tell Lincoln they got to appoint him. They should appoint him. He's the best man. You think he's not going to appoint him? Something like that, rather than you give me the votes and Cameron has got a job. Other people say there was specific promise made. Whitney on the circuit. Some of his stuff, he writes a lot, is believable, sometimes a little less believable. He said, here's the deal, what was cut. And I'm not sure this is right. He said this was the deal, that Davis told Sanderson he had no authority to bind Lincoln, no legal right to offer the position, and showed Sanderson, the Pennsylvania man, the paper saying, no, make no deals and make no contracts that bind me. Can't do it. Then Whitney says, but there was an understanding between Davis and Sanderson that Lincoln would have not a legal duty, a moral duty to appoint Cameron from Pennsylvania. What the heck does this mean? And that Davis promised he'd get all the people in the Illinois delegation to lobby Lincoln to appoint Cameron. What does that mean? It means whatever you want it to mean. Cameron's men could think that was a promise. Davis and his men could think no promise, because Davis wanted to look Lincoln in the eye and say, no deals were made on your behalf. So Lincoln told him no deals, no contracts that bind me. I fall on the side that say there weren't any deals made. Other people disagree with that, and I respect that opinion. That's where I stand on that.
Okay. Samir has a question.
Yeah, two of them. Thanks so much for being here, Judge. My first question is, can you comment on Judge Davis's relationship with his cousin, Henry Winter Davis, being so contrasting? I mean, of course, surprisingly throwing his support in 1864 for Lincoln's reelection, but given the closeness of Judge Davis, and of course, Henry Winter Davis being known as one of his biggest critics, anything you can comment on their relationship as cousins and that you found through your research?
Yeah, I can comment on that. But first, let me say Guy Fraker, my good friend, he's a great guy. His book on the Eighth Judicial Circuit is just excellent. He's a funny guy. Just did a presentation with him a few months ago. Love the guy. So when you see him, tell him Ray McKoski says hello. I looked on the map. Athens too far for an old man like me to drive. Athens.
Athens, how the locals call it, right?
Yeah,
Guy corrected me. He's like, it's not Vandalia, it's Vandalia. So I've gotten it right since.
No, I appreciate that because I've been mispronouncing it a few years. Henry Winter Davis, David Davis's cousin. David Davis lived with Winter Davis. He went by Winter. When Winter's father, David Davis's uncle, was taking care of both of them for 4 years. They became pretty close friends. In the 1860 general election, and David Davis was a member of the American Party from, not David Davis, Winter Davis was from Maryland, elected official in Maryland, know nothing basically. David Davis grew up with them. They were educated by Winter Davis's mother and aunt. They learned a lot of the same thing. Winter Davis went to Kenyon College a few years after David Davis. In the 1860 election, I looked at a lot of the letters between David Davis and Winter Davis. Winter Davis would not go for Lincoln in 1860. He suggested Lincoln not even be on the ballot in Maryland because it would just create enemies. David Davis, in his conversations with Winter Davis, got a lot of information, a lot of intelligence that he used. Winter Davis also gave speeches. He supported Bell, the Constitutional Union. Winter Davis gave speeches saying, I'm voting for Bell. He's the best person. But let me tell you, Lincoln's not all that bad. He doesn't deserve the criticism he's getting. His opinions on slavery is about the same as Bell's, et cetera, et cetera. He spoke up for Lincoln. When Winter Davis, when he gave a speech in the Congress, the Republicans stood up and cheered for him. David Davis's vote, along with one other American Party member, made the Republican the Speaker of the House. David Davis acknowledged that Winter Davis did Lincoln good in the 1860 election, maybe not so much in Maryland, but generally by speaking well of Lincoln as a possible alternative in states where Bell didn't have a chance. And Winter Davis's favorable remarks about Lincoln were broadcast in all kinds of papers, and I include in the book some of the papers and their headlines or summaries of Winter Davis's speech. Gave a big major speech in Baltimore, Maryland, where he put in good words for Lincoln. Now, and he wasn't adverse to Lincoln. I don't know enough to comment about how they split on this, or how Winter Davis came from a know-nothing to the positions he was espousing in the 60s. I don't have an answer for that. If somebody does, please let me know. It's an interesting question.
Thank you. My other question relates to the underpinnings of 1860s. So you have, of course, David Davis, who establishes the base, of course, in Chicago's Tremont House, and he, of course, kind of seizes control organically. And then, of course, there's the deal making. There's also how they fled the convention. All things that I know most people on here are acutely aware of. And then you have, in contrast, you have Norman Judd, who gets the convention site in Chicago, basically saying, like, look at all these other favorites. Like, this is a neutral ground. He, of course, encourages, Lincoln to start early in the campaign so that he's well known. And then that, kind of traces back to 1854 when Joel Madison was going to win. And I know that, of course, Mary Lincoln, no surprise, but also Judge, David Davis, really holding a lot against Judd for, them both supporting the Kansas-Nebraska Act, but also, not willing to part ways, being, despite personal loyalties, not being able to part ways with, voting for a Whig and those 5 votes. So my comment to you and question to you is one, if you, based on some of my reading that, many people blame Judd, but it was Lincoln being so magnanimous, as only Lincoln could be, in forgiving Judd, that was such a driver in him being perhaps number 2 in Chicago. Of course, Mary Lincoln holding a grudge, and Judd may have gotten a cabinet position, except he was from Illinois. But you would know through correspondence of Judge David Davis what that relationship was like, and maybe after 1860, was it more cordial between Judd and Judge Davis? Anything you can provide on that relationship would be interesting. Yeah.
All great facts that you put out there. 1854, Lincoln wanted to be appointed a senator out of the Illinois legislature, and he entered the contest with 46 votes. He needed 51 to be appointed senator. 5 people, led by Judd, including Judd, who all had a vote in the legislature, were anti-Kansas, Nebraska people. David Davis figured that those 5, Judd and his cohorts, should vote for Lincoln on the first ballot because although they were Democrats, they were anti-Nebraska Democrats. And with those 5 votes, Lincoln would have won. They don't vote for Lincoln. Lincoln never hit on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th ballots. Lincoln never hits 46 again. And Davis absolutely held this against Judd forever, that he didn't give the 5 votes, and these 5 people wind up controlling the outcome. Because what happens is Lincoln sort of goes down and up a little bit and down in the votes. But then all of a sudden, out of the blue, and this is one of the mistakes that the Davis-Lincoln team made in the 1854 senatorial election, out of the blue, from going from no votes on the whatever ballot, 6th ballot, to the leading candidate on the 7th ballot is Governor Matson. Now, we can argue about the pronunciation. Madison, Governor Madison. I worked with a person from Matson, Illinois, and it was Matson as far as she was concerned. Governor Matson, all of a sudden, has got, I can't remember, 40 votes. And the ballot before he had none. Matson had this thing planned out, and he used the second choice theory that Lincoln would use and David would use at the convention. Matson, Lincoln didn't like him. Lincoln knew he was close to being selected by the Senate. Lincoln said, I don't want him buying the position. So Lincoln throws his votes to Trumbull, one of the 5 holdouts that Judd sort of controlled or led. And with Lincoln's votes, Lyman Trumbull becomes the senator and beats Matson because Lincoln didn't trust Matson and thought that he would buy the votes. So now Davis Rudy's holding this against Judd and Trumbull. Now, but that wasn't exactly your question. Your question was the relationship between Davis and Judd, did it soften any? Right before the 1860 election, Davis writes a letter to Lincoln and says, I don't have anything personal against Judd. I think he didn't do too good of a job running the elections in 1858, but I got nothing against him personally. Well, probably true, but maybe a little against him personally. That relationship, to my knowledge, never warmed, never changed.
Okay. I had one final, I think it'll be the final question about the years riding the circuit together. I'm curious, were these guys riding along, what did they have for a law library? And were the justices rough and ready? Did they cite the law, or was it just you mentioned that they tried to mediate or force settlements of cases rather than hearing it in court. What resources did they have legally?
The one letter I recall off the top of my head said that they had 3 law books in the saddlebags, but I don't remember what the 3 law books were. This was the law library. Now, David Davis does write on several occasions that when he's a circuit judge, he comes across interesting questions of law. And when he did, he would go to the Springfield Library to research them. So there was a library in Springfield that he used. But other than that, they had a few books. But Davis did research the law on some of these things. Leonard Swett said of Davis, he knew enough law to be a good judge, but not too much to spoil him or something like that, or to ruin him. This was justice. Both Lincoln and Davis had a sense of justice, a sense of what was right, and relying on citations or authority took place. You can read and see the lawyers citing authorities, but it wasn't like you can go to Westlaw or Lexis and look up stuff, or even go to a law library. A lot of times they were just flying without the law.
Okay. Well, thank you. We'd like to thank Judge Raymond McKoski from Illinois.
And just an FYI, the guy who portrayed Lemon, or said and told us the family, is Bob O'Connor. That's the guy that you were talking about. You might know who he is.
No, terrific. I love learning stuff like this, even if there's no conclusion on it.
But he said Lemon. Yeah,
terrific.
the family told him Lemon.
Good.
All right. Well, we'd like to thank Judge McKoski for his excellent presentation about David Davis. And remember, everybody watching, if you're interested in joining the Lincoln Group, go to our website, lincolnian.org, and click on Join Now in the upper right-hand corner.